I just want to say we're so psyched that we're working with you again, Vicky, and to do this. You know, I've worked in this field for about 20 years, and there's nobody who does it better. Although the panelists who are about to go on here are great, but having you as our partner and colleague, Vicky, is great. And I am so excited that we're doing this program. You know, I thought about a couple things too. If I look out at the audience, I don't come to DC that often. Many of the big players in the field are here today. Some of the people who do the most important work. I'm looking over at Patty, Jeff, a lot of you guys out here, Angela, and Sandy, etc. You guys are the people who do the work. We are so happy to work with you on this. It's not that many people who are trying to change the world in this area, and yet it's shaping every single kid's lives. So the fact that you guys are here today, David, thank you for coming in from Chicago, etc. This is why we're doing the program. It's so great to have Vicky here. And also, the researchers I'm about to introduce represent, you know, the absolute gold standard in the field. And we want to fund more research. This stuff is incredibly important to our kids' lives. You look at that AppGap stuff, and you understand the reemergence of the digital divide that's happening. You look at what's happening in schools, and you realize that we are literally talking about now transforming the public education system in the United States, and digital media is going to be central to that. But what are we going to do about that? So this research is so central to all of it, and it is so good to have you all here and have Vicky as our colleague for many years to come. So with that, those few minor comments in mind, let me introduce our panel, because we have an amazing group of people. Just come on up and we'll get going and Vicky will run the panel. So we have Dan Anderson, the great researcher from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. We have Kevin Clark from George Mason University. Lisa Guernsey from the New America Foundation, who covered these issues for years at the Times and elsewhere. Amy Jordan, who runs the amazing program at UPenn Snnenberg, who's been such a great colleague, and Lesli Rotenberg, who is the brilliant leader of the PBS Kids Stuff. So, back to Vicky. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay. There's so many topics I want to touch on, and so we'll talk about baby media and educational media and the digital divide and all these different issues. But I do want to just run down through our guest panelists and just ask you each to just tell us, you know, really briefly if there's one thing that you want to make sure we would draw our attention to in the study, or one issue that left out of you as being, you know, first and foremost among the findings you find interesting, but make sure we talk about what would it be. So maybe I'm going to start at the end with Lesli.
Okay, this won't surprise you what I find most interesting about this study, but it is actually before I answer that question, I just want to thank Common Sense Media for doing this research and because those of us who are in this field and I see all my colleagues in the room have been creating this research since the Kaiser Family Foundation stopped doing it. We really counted on it, and we need more research about children's use of media. So, very appreciative that you did it. And I think just the disparity between the ability to reach the children who are most in need with educational media was the most stark thing for me in this research, and the idea that even though we have advanced in so many ways, and we at PBS are so excited about the promise and the potential of new media applications and technology, if we want to reach the kids who need it the most with educational media, it's very clear from this study that the best way to do it is television. And the fact that half of those low-income children who need to be reached the most do not get cable. It kind of shows this shocking disparity that the only way they're going to get educational media is through PBS. And so I think, you know, it's a bit self-serving, but I need to say it's really important that we have the kind of funding that we do from the federal government, from the people in every community around the country who support their public media station to continue that work, because it's clear that still the reaches of these children. As we all know, the other broadcasters have abandoned any work in children's educational media. Thank goodness there's wonderful work happening for young children on cable, but when we see that that's not reaching so many of the children who need it most, it's really important that we continue that funding for public television. In addition to, I think, and I won't go on and on because anyone asked other folks. Because we're so excited and we see the potential of new media, it's also really important that we come up with ways to get that new media into the hands of the kids who need it most, because we see extraordinary results from some of the research we're doing. And we're doing it with low-income populations, but we're putting the media into their hands. So I think we're really looking for partnerships with those people, whether they're technology companies or funders, philanthropists, who can come to the table and help us to get that media, that technology, into the hands of the kids that need it. Because we're seeing that the applications are really powerful in terms of their ability to help close the achievement gap.
Okay, I can't help but ask you a question on that. Because you said there's no educational content on the broadcast networks, really. And so what about the 3-hour rule if they're required to?
Well, I mean, I think so the broadcasters are basically doing the bare minimum of what they have been asked to do. And you should refer that question to my colleague, Amy Jordan, who did a great study on how educational is that content on the other broadcast networks, and I think found it to be severely lacking.
Okay, we'll get back to that topic. Amy?
I would agree with you, Leslie, that that is one of the most intriguing findings. The issue that among low-income children, the lack of access to cable and satellite television really brings to the fore questions about public policy and ensuring that children who have few resources in the home have resources through media. So I do hope that we have an opportunity to talk about implications of your findings for things like the 3-hour rule. But I would also say it struck me in looking at the numbers for the very youngest children, just how these minutes add up. So as we look across exposure to television and computers, video games, some of the other digital media, even though it's 12 minutes here and 40 minutes there, it does create a big chunk of time within children's lives where they're not interacting with humans. And we know from work like Dan Anderson's and other developmental psychologists that face-to-face time with real human beings, whether it's siblings or parents or other caregivers, is critical to children's healthy development. So I think this should serve as a wake-up call that our very youngest children are perhaps not getting the time they need. That said, it's always curious to me to know what parents how they're defining viewing. You know, when their 2-month-old is sitting in a bouncy chair, maybe the TV's on, how are they kind of mentally adding up that time? I think this will cause parents to kind of sit back and think about that.
Yeah. I want to say before I go, Lisa, if there's anybody in the audience who has any different data or opinion about access to cable among lower income kids or about any of these issues, please feel free to try to get our attention and let us know. So I'm thinking in particular on this issue, I don't know if there's anybody from the FCC or anywhere else who wants to comment on whether these numbers on access to cable in lower income population seem to ring true to you or reflect other data. I don't see anything else now, but feel free to pick up.
I first just want to say thanks as well for giving us data out again. I very much relied on Kaiser Family Foundation data and others in doing a lot of the research for my book and other reports, so it's great to have it. One of the things that stuck out for me, and this is partly due to where I sit now at the New American Foundation, where we look at the intersection of children's learning environments at very young ages and how that affects later school success. One of the things that really stuck out for me were the amount of minutes spent reading and how that contrasts with media. Also, there's more rich information in here that shows kind of over time how things may have changed. And it's shown that there might be a slight downward trend in the amount of time children spend reading as opposed to, say, 2005 and 2003. So I think that that's something that is worth calling out. I hesitate, though, to say there's a perfect displacement going on, and it seems that there's more research needed on whether TV time or even app time or mobile media gaming time is displacing reading, or if there's something else going on in the lives of families, the context in which families are living today, and the routines that they have and the way that time they may have to even interact with each other and read together, if that's causing some of these minutes to go down. But I think that it's alarming to hear about children spending less time being read to or reading. And I think it's really important. That's one of the questions that was asked in this report.
One of the things that really stuck out to me was the role of parents and the potential role of parents. And so one of the stats in the report highlighted the number of children that had televisions in their bedroom, which immediately took me back to my childhood and how I wanted to convince my grandmother to give me a TV for my room, and she was not going to have it. And so I think there are a couple of other instances in the report where you see that parents have a direct impact or can have a direct impact on the media consumption. Whether it's choosing to have a television in the child's room, whether it's downloading a particular app, whether it's choosing to pass back or not to pass back. And so I think sometimes when we talk about children's media, we talk about children and media, talking about the parents, just like the Charlie Brown, approach. These kids have parents and caregivers, and so they should be brought into the equation and educated. The second thing that I looked at or thought about after reading the report was this whole notion of consumption versus creation, and especially for traditionally underserved and diverse populations. When you look at who's consuming the largest amounts and time, spending the most time with media, and then who's involved in the creation of that media. And sometimes there's a reverse relationship. So figuring out ways to get people who consume the most of that media to be more actively involved in the control, in the design, and the creation of it.
Thank you.
I think I was most impressed by how rapidly mobile media are being adopted for use by children. We see that with television, about 90%, 98% of families have a television, and 90% of children, if I remember the number right, watch TV on a typical day. The numbers are much smaller for mobile media, but the mobile media, especially the iPod and the iPad and similar devices, have only been out a very short period of time. And we know that as the price of these technologies decrease, as they inevitably will, and probably very rapidly over the years, the adoption is going to go up really substantial, to where parents now are very concerned about a child breaking or losing the device. The devices are just going to become, like chips in the potato chips varieties. They're going to be things that you can lose without great cost. So the environment of children, and in this case, it's an environment in which they actively participate and choose to participate, the environment is changing really rapidly. Combined with another figure that I just recently heard, about 40% of the best-selling apps for these devices are for preschool and younger, including infants and toddlers. Things are really changing big time in the lives of American children, and we can feel the wind blowing, but we don't know what it means yet.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I want to start with the AAP policy, just because it's been in the news so much lately. And Lisa, I loved your book, Into the Minds of Babes. I'm so glad that you're updating it and coming out with a new edition. I guess it'll have a different title. I wonder if you could, my interpretation of your conclusion in that book was that you sort of disagreed with the AAP policy of no social media for kids under 2. And in examining all of the studies and data that were out there at that time, you felt like there was enough weakness in some of them that you didn't think that a strict, sort of no screen media under 2 was necessary. Can you describe to us now what the current AAP policy is that just came out and tell us how you feel about it, if you agree or disagree with it now?
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. I first encourage everyone to read the AAP policy that just was released last week. And it is much more in-depth than what they put out in 1999 when they first, when the American Academy of Pediatrics first said that we strongly discourage the use of screens with children under the age of 2. And I will say that in some ways I may be kind of converting a bit to some of what they have laid out in this latest recommendation. And I want to give you kind of a couple of reasons for that. First, in 1999, there was very little research out there at all about what impact screen media may have on young children. And there was an assumption made that, well, we know that children need rich social interaction, and we are just going to assume that being in a screen media means they're not getting that. And what also came from that was another sense of, oh, was there something toxic? This was not necessarily in the AAP's recommendation back then, but I think it was certainly in the air among the way parents talked about their conditions. Gosh, just like putting my baby in front of a screen is going to be rewiring the brain. And I was reacting to that a bit in my book because there was so little data on that, and also because there are, many moments in parents' lives, and I was very much in the thick of it as a mother of a colicky baby, and then suddenly having 2 infants under the age of 4 years at the time, that I, really kind of struggled with that recommendation. The latest information that's come out from the AAP is quite measured on a lot of levels, because they do go into a lot of the new research that's out, not just on screen media and children, which I will say I think there's still a lot more need for research on children under the age of 2. There's still so much we don't know. But what they do is talk about the fact that we certainly know so much more, even than we did 10 years ago, about how much the social interaction is important. And we have many more products that have claims attached to them of an educational value. And that was not the case necessarily in 1999. There were 1 or 2 videos of that type. Certainly didn't have iPad apps that were kind of claiming any kind of educational value for babies under the age of 2 at that time. So I urge everyone to look at it closely. I think it's not perfect, and the one piece that I think is missing, and that I hope that will be part of the larger conversation here, is that there's still very little distinction among kind of types of media and types of interaction that parents would have with their children around that media. And this is where the conversation has to go. Because I in my interviews, many parents came across examples that parents would say, I remember the lyrics to a song that I used to sing as a child because of something that I saw in screen media with my child. And that triggered some really nice social interactions with my kids because of that springboard that came from that media experience with my children. And this is where I think we need to kind of think more about how parents will be interacting around the screens with their kids instead of imagining it always as just kind of that babysitter for their children.
So in general, you're sort of agreeing more with the idea of no screen media time for under 2.
I think that the discouraged language is important. It's not, they're not coming hard and fast on saying, do this and you will have damage to your baby's brain. And as long as they're not scaring parents with that kind of language, I think they're on a much stronger track.
Dan, what do you think about, there's 2 sides to this question. If there's any evidence of benefit of media for kids under 2, and then if there's any evidence of harm, whether it's to brain development or to social interaction or any other sleep. What do you think about the evidence of harm?
In terms of harm, it's still really early days. There are a number of studies associating large amounts of screen exposure in the early years with negative outcome, language development, possibly attentional skills, possibly other aspects of cognitive development. But each and every one of the studies that have reported these kinds of effects can be balanced by studies that didn't find any effects. And also, every one of the studies is open to significant methodological criticism. So I think it really is still early days. There's enough evidence that suggests we should feel some alarm about the large amounts of time that many children are spending with screens. But we shouldn't, at this point, panic and especially rush to the conclusion that we're causing certain damage to children.
So an hour a day, say it was an hour a day for a 1-year-old or something like that. That's the mom who puts her through her dad, it's a half hour in the morning, a half hour in the evening. Is that something that doesn't cause you concern?
A lot depends on the child, the way, endorsing Lisa's idea, the way that time is actually spent. If it's spent with a parent who's actively engaged with the child and sharing the media, that's one thing. If it's time that the parent really needs without having the child actively engaged, really needs to prepare nutritious food or just for her own sanity, that may in fact be time well spent. So I think it's not an absolute circumstance. On the whole, though, I think the evidence is pretty clear that for children under 2, if they spend no time with screens, that's certainly not going to do them any harm, and in fact may possibly be better for them. But on the doing good side, I can say, as of now, there just simply isn't any solid evidence that babies learn from screen media or that they routinely learn from screen media, especially commercially produced screen media. We have just the beginnings of evidence that under certain circumstances, babies can learn and probably useful things from screen media. But again, it's still very early days in trying to figure out how to reliably produce that and also determine how widespread that learning can be or should be.
What about the background media? Because that's another aspect of media use. We found so much of it in the study, and it's something that was mentioned in the AAP study. I think I read that when there's television on in the background, the child's attention is interrupted once every 20 seconds to look at the screen. Is that accurate? Was that one of your studies?
Yeah, that's actually research that my students and I did. It's very clear that with background television, so now we're talking about a medium where the screen may be fairly large and salient part of the child's local environment, and especially the sound is being broadcast. Children who would otherwise be engaged in an activity like play or social interaction, infants are readily distracted. They pay less attention, they break attention away from their primary activity more frequently, and their attention is less focused when they're engaged in that. And we know that kind of focused attention is actually important for development and predictive of positive development later on. So children need to be able to spend some time in focused, engaged play with toys, for example. Now, one might imagine that, you can take care of that problem partly by using little screens and earbuds. So so now the child isn't seeing the screen and isn't being distracted by the sound. But in fact, what happens is that as the parent becomes more engaged with this medium and its background for the child, because it's somebody else's medium, somebody else's show, parents' reactions to the children become slower, they're less likely to respond to the child, and their interactions with the child are of considerably lower quality than if the parent isn't engaged with media. So having no media for the child, but having lots of media for the parent is not a solution at all. In fact, may actually create an even bigger problem than having basic videos for the child.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So let's talk about new media for a minute. And Kevin, I want to turn to you for a second. I mean, what are some of the most exciting new interactive digital media devices that you're seeing out there, or products that you see out there that you have most hope for?
Well, I mean, first of all, PBS and Sesame do amazing work for children's media and programming. But one of the things that we do at my Center for Digital Media Innovation and Diversity is we have a features section. And we try and feature products that you never hear about. And one that I'm really excited about now is a gentleman out of Minnesota, Jeffrey Morris, is trying to take real science related to space and NASA quality science and make it available to children through, he has a book, almost like a graphic novel, and then he is an amazing animator and an amazing filmmaker and digital media artist. And he's an example of kind of these independent producers that are out there that are trying to do that type of work. There's also a guy in Florida that is doing some animation work. He has a property called Lesli, and he's trying to figure out a way to make this little African-American girl be the face of STEM. And so those are just two examples of, I think given the power of media and the ease of use of media, we're going to see a lot more people who have an idea and then they go with it. The challenge is, how do you get that guy from Minnesota in the same room with somebody who can put his show on TV or put his application and make it available? So my push, and one of the things that I talk about, is when you're looking at production and when you're looking at kind of trying to diversify the producers, there are people out there right now who are making stuff, and we just got to find them. The other piece, and I think this is where common sense is ahead of the game, is helping parents, and particularly, again, those in underserved populations, to be able to navigate and make decisions about which media to expose their children to. So the new effort with looking at putting education ratings on products, I think is going to be tremendous. And it's not just because I'm involved with it and helping them, but we use, in my house, I use common sense media to help me say no to my child. So, when he says, I want to read this book or look at this movie, I say, well, what does common sense say? Well, common sense says it's good for 12-year-olds. Well, you're only 11, so you can't watch it. So, in a discussion. So I think common sense media, helping people to kind of understand how to decide how to use all of this media. New York Times just had an article a few days ago where it looked at math apps. And again, that's a great opportunity for parents to be able to sift through all of this stuff. Because yes, we're excited that there are new producers and that everybody and their mother can make an app. But that's part of the problem. Everybody and their mother can make an act. So how do you pick the right ones? So I think it's going to be a combination of these new producers along with the expertise in this room and the expertise of some of the current producers and distributors. So long-winded answer to say there are those two, and we try and feature some.
I think it's a big deal because if you sit your child in front of the television, you know you can turn on Sesame Street, you know you can go to PBS Kids. But with the world of newer media, there's so many other options out there. I mean, a lot of it will be branded or is branded, and I guess that's one way to find it. But how parents find this stuff that's quality, I think is going to be.
And the challenge for a lot of the producers is, yes, I can make something that looks really cool, but it's not educational.
Yeah.
And so how do you then begin to help those producers and those creators begin to think about making this great content not only beautiful, but educational?
You know what? Go ahead, Leslie.
Well, first of all, I want to share my common sense media anecdote, which is now my children are using it on me. So just be careful, because that's what happens. They come to me and they say, I've already checked common sense media, and here's what it said. But I also want to thank Kevin because he is on our advisory board and doing a really great job of trying to connect us and our producers with some of the people that are doing really interesting work in this field. But I wanted to speak to your question, Vicky, of what are we finding that's really exciting? Because we're doing a lot of experimentation and we're really excited about a couple of trends. One of them, well, first, I just want to mention the characteristics, which are, we're excited about touchscreen technology and the ability for the very youngest kids to be able to manipulate and the engagement opportunity for them to be able to control the media, to be able to really engage them, and the customization that's involved in them being able to create media that's at their level, and then as they begin to then advance the media experience. And so there are all these new ways that we think we're able to really not only engage children, but help them to learn and help them to gain these critical skills. And some of the experimentation that we're doing, we're finding really exciting, is combining a number of different media properties. So in other words, instead of just taking one property, combining all of the properties that we have that teach literacy, and all of the properties we have that teach math or science together in a curriculum. And we're finding that kind of combination is more powerful. And then combining media interventions. So in other words, surrounding a child with an experience that is a television experience, and then a computer game experience, and then potentially an app, and then maybe an interactive whiteboard where they're interacting with their colleagues, their peers, and being able to help each other and encourage each other and root for each other. And all of those dynamics, putting them together, our hypothesis is it's going to create an even more educational environment where learners of all different kinds are getting the stimulation they need, and we're able to engage them, and they're going to be successful. So a lot of the experimentation that we're doing is funded by a Department of Education grant called Ready to Learn, and it's in a new phase right now. We have 40 new free games that are available on our website. PBS Kids Lab is the name for it, and they're reading and math games by the best producers in the world of children's media. And in every one of them, we are doing this kind of experimentation that we are calling, now I forgot the name, we're calling them, where we're really like surrounding children with in each case. They're called transmedia suites, that's kind of the insider term, but we're surrounding children with, in every case, a computer game, a mobile application. In some cases, we're experimenting with 3D technology, with augmented reality, and some of the things that we're finding so interesting for the youngest children is getting them to actually movement using the camera, so they're jumping up and down, so then they're active. And they're waving things in front of the camera, so they're really engaged and in the experience and demonstrating what they've learned and what they're capable of.
What age are you starting at? That to me, my big question to you then is, listening to what Dan just said, right? And being a dad is, okay, at what age do you think it's okay to have, obviously we love stuff, you do love stuff, But what age do you start? You know, you doing that with a 1-year-old, you doing that with a 4-year-old?
We don't create any media for children younger than 2, and we're finding that this particular media,
Right.
3, is really where they're capable of doing a lot of these things, and then we're seeing maybe the greatest gains, although it's early to be able to say it, for 40.
See, that's my biggest question to you guys, being the novice that I am. It's like, okay, let's assume you can do great stuff. But at what age? Because our job is to tell the world, you know, okay, when your kid is 3 or 4, this is the age you should really start letting them play with this or letting them use that. So what do you guys, you see what I'm saying? Because obviously we know Lesli and her colleagues create great stuff, and they're going to tap, hopefully tap some of the unknown producers and creators out there who can do really cool stuff. But what do you guys think is the right age? That's a big question. You know what I mean? Because you look at the research, you look at the brain development stuff, so what's the right age to start with?
Can I just jump in though? I think that some of the answers to what is the right age have to do with the context in which that media is inserted into children's lives, because well, number one, children have the older siblings, so they might be watching, 2 or 4-year-old might really love Super Science Kid, and then maybe 1-year-old brother is seeing them at the same time, and the other and the really hard thing about those kinds of questions about kind of what age has to do with how the parents then talk about that media or experience it with the child, or even later after a child's kind of had some sort of viewing or playing of it, how they then just talk to them about it later. So I find it really, I understand the desire to want to hit an age, but without the context conversation, it can be really hard to say, hard and fast has to be this age.
Yeah, I would also argue that the context should also include considerations of what else is being delivered with the content. So it's not just about the interaction of the child with the medium, but about the interpersonal context, but also is there commercial content that's being delivered with an app or a television show? And is that something that the very youngest of children are really prepared to process and understand and make a part of their lives?
Well, are there commercials in most little kids' apps? I don't think there's advertising.
Yeah, so I don't know that apps would be the appropriate question, but certainly when we're thinking about media that are made for very young children, preschool age children.
I think it's a relevant question to ask related to computer games.
And sites that very young children go to.
But the thing is, what I think that for us, right, for you guys to figure out, and for not just people up here, but a lot of the folks in the audience, okay, how do you make this clear to the average person? Context is context, right? We all get what we mean by it. You think we get what we mean by context. But, because this is where it's going, right? This is where the world is going. So how do we think of your average mom, particularly, who's got a million things going on. I was listening, I can't remember what you Kevin said, and you do things need some time. They gotta cook, and they gotta, so it's fine, but how do we explain this to people in really simple, easy to understand terms so they can make good decisions? Because that's why I push on the age one, is because most people ask me, they go, okay, is this okay for a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old? And then you go, well, it depends on the context. But we got to be able to explain to them over time, and this is why the research is so valuable, Vicky, is, okay, how do we say that really easily to people? One way is to say, just turn on PBS, just use PBS Kid. But another one is, this is the 3 things you should do if you let your kid do that. That's what I think you guys should help us figure out.
I don't know if there's an easy answer. One of the things when we're talking about context, the early research done by the Federation for American Scientists on gaming, and I think Lesli, you alluded to this, is that they cited contextual bridging as one of the assets or reasons to use gaming in education. And what they meant by it was using games to create a bridge between something that I already know and something that I can visualize or imagine. So I always say, the first time I don't want the first time that my child sees a cat to be on the screen, right? So when you're talking about context, and I think the AAP recommendations, one of them mentioned this about context, is that we need to, especially for younger kids, allow them the opportunity to create and gather that information so that they have a context, so that they know what it is to play outside, or to play a game, or to be in a certain situation. And so that the first time they experience it is not via a screen. Now, I understand that because of access, sometimes the first time you see the Eiffel Tower may be through a screen, but we shouldn't rely on that. So the work that I do with video games is to try and help students through creation go back to their prior knowledge and their scaffolding and create a context for what they're going to create in a virtual or media format. So that's what I mean when I say context, that you actually have a scaffolding that you rely upon, and then you say, okay, this is similar, or it's not similar, or this, I know this is imaginary, or play. So I think it's important to understand that the context is specific to each child, so it'll change.
There are some kinds of rules of thumb that can probably be pretty useful for parents. Children are able to put together television so it becomes understandable. If you think about television, it's a sequence of shots, and the connection between shots, there's going to be some kind of an inference that has to be drawn about the continuity of those images. So, for example, an establishment shot of the outside of this building in the daytime, followed by a cut to an interior shot here. Those two things have no perceptual connection. They don't look like that. The second shot is showing the inside of the building we just saw the outside of. Well, children start to put that montage together around 2 years of age, just beginning at about 18 years of age. They begin to associate, to become really sensitive linguistically to the soundtrack. An awful lot of television is a voiceover audio where it's not actually a character speaking, but like Teletubbies, for example, most of the meaningful speech is voiceover audio. They put that together around 2 years of age. So putting those things together means that by about 2.5 years of age, the child is pretty much able to understand age-appropriate television that's produced in standard ways. And so anything that they would be watching before that is either a waste of time from an educational point of view, or has to be very specially produced for babies in ways that they would be able to understand. I think that's communicable.
There's some questions from the audience. Did we end up getting a handheld mic for folks in the audience at all? Pass the mic.
While you're reaching out, can I just say, I think that one of the best things that we can do for parents is to ask them, they know their kids.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do this on our website, is do you have, and we all have both of these kinds of kids probably, right? You have one child who can actually moderate their media use and will watch TV for a little bit, and then they'll go read a book, and then they'll go play class, and then you have the other child who's just going to sit there, whether it's a computer game, a video game, and never leave the screen unless you. And so I think part of what we do is to kind of help parents decide which is great for your child. And then I just want to mention one thing we're working on that I think is really exciting, which is tools that we can put in parents' hands, whether it's on an app, their smartphone, their BlackBerry, whatever, where they can track. They can put in the age of their child. We can recommend media that's appropriate for the child, and then they can use it, and they can then track. Okay, my child's doing great at these skills, and now they need to work on these, and so we'll prescribe another thing for them to try. So, technology can also give us some ways to really customize for the parents the answer to that question that I think is difficult.
The one thing I want to say, you guys, before you go to questions, look, you guys all saw, I think you didn't mention this today, but you saw that we all know the AAP came back last week, right? So did you see the data about how many pediatricians actually talk to their kids. 14% of parents said that they actually ever talked to their pediatrician about it. So one of the things to me, is everybody here from the AAP? One of the things we all ought to do is go to the AAP and all the pediatricians. I remember when we first started content, we used to do this. To put on the experience. Like the stuff you're saying, other than a parent, maybe they'll get it, but if every pediatrician in America understood the basics of this, and then actually spoke to the parents about it, it'd be an incredibly valuable way to transmit this information. And we all ought to go as a group to the pediatrician, not just to the 5 people on the AAP Committee on Children and Media. I mean, all the pediatricians in the United States, and go, this is the 5 basic messages you need to give to every parent. Because that isn't happening. That's what the disconnect between what they said last week and then the data that the research shows, which is the average pediatrician is just not doing this, and you guys can tell them what to say.
Hi there. Congratulations on the report. I'm Dina Borzakowski. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I want to draw attention to another C word here. So you talk about context, but I really want to emphasize the issue of content. You're talking about a huge number of hours in front of screen media. And unless the content is devoid of advertising and violent issues and actions, I don't know if we really want kids spending more time and having more access. So interestingly enough, from your data, perhaps the digital divide could be protective in nature. That kids don't have access to more cable and more handheld and more violent video games may be a good thing. So until good content is easily accessible, do we really need more technology time?
Well, let's talk a little bit about content and focus on television, since that's what kids are spending the most time with, whether it's because of digital divide or whatever. And David, I'm going to call you in a minute to give us your assessment about the quality of what's out there. But let me start with the quality of educational content. And Amy, you've done studies over the years that have actually assessed, as Leslie was saying, what the quality is of the programming that's out there on broadcast for kids educationally. What's the latest? What is it like now?
Yeah, with the educational studies that we did at Snnenberg, we were looking at them mainly in response to the Children's Television Act and the 3-hour rule processing guideline that followed up. And we were curious to see how the broadcasters interpreted this notion of educational, and we found in year after year of study, and then others who have looked at this as well, Dale Kunkel and Barb Wilson, have found that Leslie's right, about 25% of the commercial broadcasters' programs that are labeled as educational, we're not seeing it, we're not seeing a curriculum, we're not seeing very much educational value. And every year I take a look at the broadcasters' lineup, and it changes. You know, it changes every year, and it's really difficult for parents to keep up with what's out there and what's appropriate for their children. So I applaud Sita and Jim and Common Sense Media for taking this on, because there's an ocean of media out there, and it's very difficult for parents to know what kind of content is appropriate. You know, that said, it's time that we move from understanding what's available on broadcast television to starting to systematically look at what's available in other media. So moving into digital platforms, I think, is critical. And I think there is some research that's being done now on digital platforms and educational content. But Dina, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that as much as we are struck by the 80-some% of children who are not having iPads and not having access to applications, it could be a good thing, but then the other side of it is that we have a generation of children who are growing up quite comfortable with technology and fearless about making it bend to their will. You know, as Kevin pointed out, you know, children who feel confident and feel that they know what to do with media are more likely to do interesting things with it. So we have some kids who are and some kids who aren't. I worry about that.
Go ahead. I just wanted to jump in on the content piece too, because I do think that's an incredibly important part of the conversation. And I have always kind of thrown out this mantra of the 3 C's as a way for parents to think more deeply about the kind of shows they might let their children watch, or whether it's the right time of the day to be using media with kids in that content context, and then your individual child, which is key to all of this. And I wanted to just add that in addition to just looking at whether content is violent or not violent, or whether it shows some aggressive images on screen and what that might mean to very young children, there's more and more research out there about particular features on the screen and what those mean to young children. So straight line storytelling that doesn't come a zigzag around or a digression, participation on screen, someone on screen that labels something, an object in front of them, and says, oh, here's a pail and here's a shovel, and so the child actually knows kind of what's being talked about on screen is important. Certainly, the ability for a child to kind of hear things over and over, some repetition and review can be very meaningful to young kids who are either shown in interactive media as well as just playing on TV. So there's lots more that we're learning about what strong content can look like for young kids, and it's an important piece of parent education.
Okay, and tell us a comment about quality of educational television?
No, my comment with Angela Campbell, Georgetown Law. I wanted to know whether you looked at feed chip use by these families, or if anyone has done any recent research on why it's not, or whether it's working.
No, we didn't look at it, and I'm not aware of any other recent research. So, David Kleeman, I wanted to just ask you in general, we're talking about like the Guernsey issue, the importance of the content. If you could bring the mic over here. And what is your assessment of the quality of children's programming, whether it's entertainment or educational, that's on the air now, especially for the youngest kids?
I think for the youngest kids is the key statement, that up to the age of 6, really, so 3/4 of the age group that you looked at, we're still in something of a golden age of content for kids. That the degree of research that goes into preschool television, at not just at PBS and PBS Kids Sprout, but also Nick Jr., Disney Jr., the level of research that goes into programming is at an all-time high. The researchers are starting to talk to each other. The relationship between producers and researchers has gotten much, much more comfortable over the years, that there's a really collaborative relationship. Beyond the age of 6, though, there's some wonderful entertainment, but the context changes, and there's really not strong educational programming, not a big enough core body to appeal to the diverging needs, the diverging interests of kids once you get past 6. And that's the big problem right now. And that's what makes a study like the one that compared SpongeBob to Caillou so ridiculous on its face. The entire context of the two programs changes completely.
What do you think?
I would still say
What do you mean?
that one is made for an entirely different purpose from the other program. I'll continue to harp on my long-time thing that I don't think we take enough risks for kids, especially as we get to the age of creative risks for 6 to 8, 8 and above, that we're losing the right to take those risks. If you look at broadcasters around the world, the types of topics that they can take on, the types of genres that they do that we just aren't doing in this country, documentary for kids, sort of autobiographical pieces or biographical pieces about how kids grow up, introducing kids to different cultures around the world so that they start to understand the world they're growing up in. We're not taking that kind of risks right now.
So we're talking about the quality of educational television content, which is so important because that's what kids are using it. I'm looking at Sandy Calvert here. Maybe you can bring Mike over here to see it. So what about research about the quality of digital and interactive mobile educational content for kids? What do we know now? What's coming as far as research down the pike?
I think it's a fascinating question, and also want to thank Common Sense Media and Vicky for bringing this to us. There aren't really a lot of content analyses on the apps. One of the things we tried to do was get a sense of what was out there about a year ago through my class, and there's incredible variability. And it comes back to I've heard Dan talk about this, about a media diet. and the quality versus the quantity of the content. And we don't know enough at this point about what's really good as an app. And I do think that the iPad, that was the striking thing in this report to me, is that the iPad and these other touchable screens are potentially a game changer. And one of the things I would like to just raise is, what does 21st century literacy mean to us? I mean, to me and many of the people sitting here, it had to do with learning to read. But screens occupy so much of our time now that it seems to me that we really need to give some thought to some questions that Dan's asking, like how do kids begin to put together the structure, and in something like an iPad that's so touchable and that you can move and access the content that's not a story. But also you've got some of the production features built in where you can kind of zoom in and out and pan and do other things by touching it. Exactly how do children come to understand these devices? Because it could potentially be a game changer. But your question about quality is one I don't think we've answered at this point about apps, but there's a lot of potential.
And Sandy, just one thing, because I was looking over at CETA, and one of the reasons why we started the educational ratings project, which of course is morphing as we speak, because we realize what the needs huge, right? So to me, there's two values there. One is, I'm a parent, I want to know, if all the stuff Leslie's creating is actually educational. And since it's Leslie, I assume it is. But I actually want to know, and I want smart people like Kevin to figure out how to evaluate that, or Dan, you got to figure out how to do that, right? That's one thing. But the second thing is, because we're going to create that rating system, you know that some things are going to pop as the big new things on the iPad. I mean, and hopefully it will be sort of a good housekeeping seal. And then you will say, okay, here are the things, the characteristics that go into making a great educational thing for this new platform. I agree that the tablet is clearly going to be the platform, right? And by the way, it's going to be the platform in school too. Your kids are not going to be walking around with backpacks. In 5 years, they're going to be carrying a little tablet around. Well, everything's going to be on that one little device. Would be my humble prediction. Having said it, so you've got to think therefore about how we both help parents, but in some ways by doing that system, you're helping producers figure out what they ought to do too. And that's where we need, this is the community. I mean, literally in this room are probably half the people that really matter. But we got to figure out how do you make that clear to the producers, Kevin's talking about, or you're talking about Angela, and then Sandy, and then you also got to talk about how does the average parent understand, here are the 5 things, I'm going to have 5 things that I'm going to let my kid use, here are the 5 I'm going to let them use. Because that's the direction that it's all headed. And if you guys, we all work together and you help us, maybe we can get that message out to both the consumer and the producer.
Can I just build on that for just 1 second? Because it seems to me like there are lots of levels about some of the questions you're asking. One of them has to do with looking at the content. Some of the things that Amy has traditionally sort of done. Another is how well kids can access the content, which is more what Kevin is, and where the iPad, I think, is a game changer, and Leslie's making things right now. And then, you're looking at what is it. Then you have to do studies about how children actually take information away. So it's multi-tiered. There's all kinds of different ways that you can address this, and then, to go to your concern about what is the parent doing with the platform and the child. So all of these things have to be in this dynamic relationship answer. At what age can child A do this?
But see, the people are in the room to do this. I mean, my actual point is, hey guys, this is the group that'll figure this out, and it is going to end up on that platform. So this hopefully is the beginning. No, I mean, there's a lot of collaboration on happening here. CETA, everybody ought to know CETA, because the people in this room can figure that out, because then you got to explain to everybody in really simple, easy to understand terms. This is what we need to do. And the truth is you have more control of that over trying to tell the broadcasters to do decent TV programming, which we all know they aren't doing very much.
Okay, David Kleeman has some comments.
Very quickly, that there are a couple other projects going on in addition to the Common Sense Media digital literacy work. The Fred Rogers Center is doing one on defining and describing quality in children's digital media. Warren Buckleiter's Children's Technology Review does this on a month-to-month basis. So a lot of the thinking is going on, and it's a matter of making sure that we are creating a nicely shaped Venn diagram and not all piling onto one space.
I agree.
You know, Sandy asked, what is literacy going to look like in the 21st century? I think it's a great question, and I think these kids are going to have to know how to manipulate technology, and that's why I feel like there is such a disadvantage. Coming back to your question, you know, like maybe it's okay if they don't have access. I mean, I think I couldn't agree more about it's content that matters. But the more I thought about your question about like maybe they're at a disadvantage and an advantage, it's not a problem, the more it bothered me because we know, even this early on, we know that some of this technology has the opportunity, has the capacity to help close the achievement gap. And I'll just cite one tiny little study with cell phones and low-income communities where we went in, it was 80 different, I'm getting too specific. Anyway, we went in and we gave cell phones to these low-income families, and we tested an app. We tested a few different literacy apps, and on one of them, the children's vocabulary that was tested increased 30%. And this is just over a period of weeks. And no, it was unstructured. We just gave them the app, they just played with it as much as they wanted to. And so to me that says, okay, we can help those children achieve vocabulary skills, which we know are critical to being able to be successful once you enter kindergarten. And if they don't have access to it, then we're not really getting the technology in the hands of kids that need it most. So I'm concerned about those kids, the kids that are using media the most, the Black kids and the Hispanic kids are using media the most, and yet they don't have access to the very best media in terms of education. So that's why I feel like we need to make an effort to partner with folks in this room who are children's advocates and businesses and technology companies and people who want to fund that kind of educational media and get the right content into the right hands to try to close that gap.
I want to ask a question about policy for a second. And so there's a lot of different policy issues that I think are getting raised here. And one has to do with new media. I mean, to the extent that we think that new interactive media really are a potential game changer in terms of the child's ability to learn from them and the interactivity and, you know, taking away from passive screen. How do we get the best educational media products in the hands of kids who need them? And both in new media and in terms of not taking our eye off of the fact that it is the television that gives this content, or other policy issues that I'm not thinking of. What are the policy options for helping to ensure the promise of media for education is met?
As we're talking about tablets, and I agree, tablets are going to change the way we access content, the way we create content. And with this new tablet device, I guess I could say iPad, with the iPod, now you don't even need a computer. So we're detethering the iPhone or the iPad from a computer, and so we can just walk around with that and have everything up in the cloud. One of the challenges that I see from a policy standpoint is access to the internet, access to Wi-Fi. I mean, you know, it's one thing to have a mobile device, but the reality is that you then have to have additional access to Wi-Fi. And I think that's also one issue from Pew. Pew had released their study a year or two ago about mobile and people of color, and talked about how Latinos and African Americans were adopting and using mobile technologies at higher rates than whites, and these were, I think, middle and high school. One of the challenges is, if that continues, then you have a person that already has a smartphone, and then you want them to get an iPad, and then they have to pay another fee for Wi-Fi for that iPad. And so you then have to think about, when we begin to move content to a digital format, that it's not just about accessing it physically, but it's about, okay, now who's going to pay my Wi-Fi bill, so that my child can access their science book, through this new device. And so I think if there's a way that, as a constituent group, we can figure out how to make sure that people in traditionally underserved areas get access to Wi-Fi in a similar way that they got access to cable, I think that will go a long way.
Yeah, we've seen some of this. We've seen the government, the federal government, recognizing the potential of people having internet access and accessing digital media through their homes, and schools and libraries. So we first saw the first wave of federal funding through the E-rate program maybe 15 years ago. And even as recently as this past summer, that program was extended to bring internet access to rural areas, or areas that over the last decade or so have not had digital media available to them. But what's been interesting of late is the media industry's interest in getting involved in this. So I'm thinking about Comcast/NBC. Part of their agreement with the FCC to allow this merger to happen was that they would do more on behalf of low-income families. And so Comcast is agreeing to provide inexpensive computers, but also very low-rate internet access for these families. And I think that's an important step. But the big question mark that I have with all of these initiatives is, so who's teaching the children how to use the media? So you can dump these technologies into homes, but for the very little kids that are reported in this study, it's pretty clear to me that the way children are accessing new media technologies like the iPad or tablets, it's not that they're going out and buying them, but parents have them, and they're using them, and they're modeling use for their children.
I was just going to add that I actually think that it's right to it, that the policy universe needs to be considered even broader in terms of how to ensure that children are getting these kind of rich learning environments, whether it's digitally or otherwise. And that includes everything from better family leave policies, which enable more parents to be able to interact in really positive ways with their kids and maybe spend less time occupying them with screens, all the way through to how we envision our libraries working, how we train and do professional development for our teachers, everything, certainly public media and the availability of wonderful kind of creative content that we did, things describing the documentaries that are made for young children. We really need to re-envision the policy landscape to consider the 360 surround that children are now immersed in when it comes to it.
Well, I'd say there's a few things. First of all, the good news is, unlike the television arena, this one is yet to happen. And so, in any kind of real scale. So we can shape it now. So all of us ought to think about this right now. We've got to think about going forward, how we work together on this. But meaning, trying to get, ABC now to run real children's almanac. Come on. I mean, this is we can shape this one. That's number one. And we know, the people up here and in the audience can probably figure out the right kind of message. The second thing I'd say is, we deal with the industry a lot. We have a really interesting, complex relationship with the industry because we hammer them a lot. And then we also say, okay, you can distribute, you can license our content. We're very straightforward, we're very blunt. My feeling is dealing with the Comcast and the Time Warner cables and the DirecTVs and those dudes, they will do this. They will do, I don't think it's, and by the way, they're going to do it for market reasons. So I think they need to be shamed sometimes when they do that, but I actually think they get this. And in the long sense, it's their best interest. Because we have extensive content, that's what I spend more of my time doing now. And I actually think they're going to go there. So I actually think that if you look at basically the big cable and tell the guys who can wire this, they're willing to go there. We have to speak with a clear voice to them about what they need to do. I also think that they will be open, by the way, to some of what you're saying, Lisa, in the context of we have to teach parents the basics. I mean, that's what common sense is in business to do, but I think they'll do that. I think the other hidden one here, sorry for the statement I'm about to make, but look, the big tech guys now, the Facebooks and the Googles, right, are doing really bad stuff on the privacy level, really bad stuff in our opinion. And some good, but a lot of bad. Okay, they could play in this, they want to look good too. Particularly in this town, they're hiring legions of lawyers and lobbyists to try to look good and to try to not be regulated on the privacy arena. So they're big potential players on this one too. I actually think virtually all the private sector
is going to will play in with this in a genuine way, because they perceive it to be in their market interest. And you ask about who's really going to create the content. I mean, there will be some of the people you're talking about, Kevin, who are somebody off in Des Moines who figures out some new cool app that we all, 5 years from now, think, wow, that's so amazing. But it's going to also be the Apples and the Disneys, guys. And I think they're going to go there because they're going to see money. So if the good news is we can shape it now in a way we cannot shape the traditional broadcast and cable medium anymore. And I think the wiring guys, which to me is basically the telephone guys and the cable guys, they're going to go there, but A, because they believe it's they know it's the right thing to do, and B, it's going to be good for their business. I'm actually pretty optimistic about it.
All right, so we've got a couple questions from the audience. Before I go there, does anybody else have anything they want to add on the panel policy-wise?
So I just want to add, because we're talking a lot about getting this technology into the hands of children and parents at home, which is good and important. I just want to add the other element, which is this whole notion of universal preschool. And the idea that every child really needs to have a preschool experience. And they're not. There's so many children who aren't getting that. And that's another policy area. And so even providing access to preschool, providing that experience to kids, and then thinking about what is the role of technology in that preschool experience, and even in a kindergarten and a first grade curriculum, how can we get this technology into the classroom where it has enormous potential to jettison, the kind of learning achievement that we're looking for in areas like reading and science and math. We are just overwhelmed with potential things like interactive whiteboards and what you can do with media where kids are problem solving and collaborating. And so that's a whole other frontier that I think there are policy implications and a long way to go, I think, to try to get this really powerful tools into the hands of kids at an early age.
Okay. And we have a question right here.
I'm Marta Llanos. I come from Peru. We have done a similar study in Peru. And I would like to ask you, we have been talking very much about education. What is the framework of education that you are using within using media? Because lately, for the 21st century, we are seeing the famous Delors report, who established 4 pillars of education. The first 2 are related basically to information and something that goes much more into cognitive issues. But the 2 most important ones for the 21st centuries are learning how to be and learning how to interact with others. And therefore, if we focus on these 2 most important worldwide issues, pillars that we need to do something, I wonder, for instance, we started in Peru, because we are consumers of American programs, we started to analyze what are the main characters that the children like. Because here, I haven't heard about children participation. Maybe it's an issue that I like to bring very much because I work for children's rights around the world. And I'm sorry, but you still haven't signed the children's rights. But what is that children's like on these characters? Yeah. Because that's where we are learning exactly what are these driven forces for interaction, and that's what could give us some hints that, of course, we need to research a little bit more about what happened in violence for children, what happened on child-to-child interaction and adult-child interaction. Yeah. The second thing is that I hear here that you are, as parents, waiting for, and I think it's a wonderful effort of common sense. I should have started by saying thank you, but parents are waiting what common sense of someone else is telling. How about who listens to the voices of parents? What parents have to say, because after all, they might not be professionals, but they are the greatest professions, being parents. So therefore, all these issues, I feel, and as a researcher, because I'm a professor at the university, I just have a little hint that all the data comes from 0 to 8, but there are some specific things on the questions in the research that maybe doesn't go for the 0 to 2 children, but mainly from the 3 to 8. So I think that needs to have a separate, so that you don't put everything on the basket. And thank you very much, because today I have really learned quite a lot, thanks to all the presenters and thanks to this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments. That was a lot in there. It was really rich. I don't know if was there somebody else back here who had a comment or a question as well? Yep. Okay.
Can I just comment while we're waiting on the microphone? I agree with much of what you said, and one element of your comment that I wanted to pick up that I think is important to consider is this idea of what are we considering to be educational, right? So is it child interaction, is it cognitive, is it social? And when we're talking about very young children in media, of course, everything's educational. Everything that they learn, it could be that they're learning how to be aggressive or learning how to read. So I do think it's important to articulate what we want our children to be learning and how we want them to be developing in these earliest years.
And one of the things that they learn has to do with the gender roles that are in media for young children. Some of the work that Gina Davis's institute is doing, Steve Smith at USC Amherst, is really eye-popping in terms of even just the number of characters that are female versus male, and let alone the nature of the depictions, is absolutely phenomenal. And I think that when we talk about kids are learning from media, no matter what, they're learning from that. And Steve, do you want to talk at all about the different dimensions of quality that you're...
I will, but
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Ariadna, and I work for the Consortium for School Networking, and I have 3 things. First is UNESCO is starting an M-Learning initiative where they're basically looking at something that you mentioned, the use of mobile devices that do not have to do with smartphones, and how other countries are using them to bridge the gap of information. So I think, in part, I think that is important. You were mentioning that Black and Latinos are using cell phones. And so now it's our time to learn, if they have those devices, how to use them. It doesn't mean an iPad, it doesn't mean access to computer, but if you have that device, then use it for education. The other thing is that as COSM we're doing is we're looking at the acceptable use policies. I know we're 0 to 8, but it touches on the lives of kids from 5 to they graduate. We know that for kids in elementary school, they're just blocking the internet instead of teaching them how to use it and not creating responsible digital citizens. So we're seeing that move right now from AUP or acceptable use policies to responsible use policies. And I think as a parent now we're not teaching the parents how to be responsible users and how to be that first user for the kid and telling them what it means to be in the digital media. The third thing is that we're looking how to bridge that gap between kids that have and not have digital devices like iPads, computers, by telling kids, bring your own technology. And here we will give you that access to the internet, but schools are still trying to figure out how to do it because SIPA and other regulations, cyberbullying, and so on, so on. So I think as Common Sense and on a lot of partners, we need to start thinking how to use schools to help with that gap. And just how to start teaching parents to be that voice of parents. And if the AAP is not telling them, if the broadcast media is not telling them how to use the media, is through schools that would teach parents how to use it. Because I know PBS has a lot of resources for parents, but parents don't know.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the other way that schools have been important in terms of the digital divide computers. Obviously, schools and libraries have done a lot to make it so that kids of all different economic strata have access to computers and the internet. But I was really struck by the degree of the digital divide and home computer access for young kids in these data. I wanted to ask you, Kevin, does that matter still? I mean, does the digital divide, forget about that, the new media and the iPads and the smartphones, but does the digital divide itself matter for kids still?
Well, yes and no. Access to the physical stuff matters, but more importantly, access to quality content, to resources that may now reside online matters even more. And so one of the things, and I think the lady from Peru mentioned this, is issues of parental engagement, helping, because parents are still, in some instances, the gatekeepers for what comes into the home, or what decisions are made in terms of what are we going to buy, what are we going to spend money on, are we going to buy a new computer, or are we going to buy something else? And so I think the more that we can educate parents about what's important, what's relevant in terms of their child's education, that might inform the decisions that they make around technology. So when we look at issues of access, to me, it really focuses or hinges on access to quality content. And we can then, through public libraries, through schools, we can figure out how to get the physical access to it. But helping families to figure out how to navigate all of this content that exists is, I think, key. I just participated in the Department of Education Equity Commission, and they're creating this huge document. And at the end, someone made a suggestion that, well, maybe we should have a list of things, recommendations for parents, because the Equity Commission was really about how do you help all kids get a fair education. Well, if you're a person in a school district or in a school district that's failing or a school that's failing, what do? Right? You can't just transfer out. You can't just pull your child out and send them to private school. So the issue became, how do we create a list of recommendations and strategies for parents to say, if you're in this situation, here's what you should do. Likewise, we need to do a similar thing with media, because all of this media is coming at us, like water out of a fire hose, and we're just assuming that if you have a BlackBerry, you must know how to use it. And so if you know how to use it, then you know how to tell your kids how to use it. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, Dan said something this morning that made me rethink how I interact with media, because my kids always say, Dad, you're always on the computer. And your research was saying, well, that impacts my interaction with my kids. Well, duh, but I didn't know it until Dan just presented that research. So I think we need to do a better job of informing parents and helping them, giving them strategies to use this media, whether or not we're in traditionally underserved, rural, or urban areas.
I just want to build on that and say, could not agree more. I think parents are the key to this. And I just want to bring another perspective that we got, again, through some ready-to-learn research we did in low-income communities, and that was, we were shocked, or I should say I was shocked, by what these parents are going through, what their lives are like with the economic decline, and how much they're struggling. And one of the things we heard from them is that they very, very much want their children to succeed, but they have no time. And even suggesting that they read to their children was a non-starter for them. They do not have time, they told us point blank, to read to their children. And so we had to get really creative as to A, how do we reach these parents and communicate with them, and B, what are the messages that are going to resonate? And what we came up with was very, very simple ways to tell them that they could actually help their children learn kind of some of the basic literacy skills while they're on the way running an errand, while they're grocery shopping, while they're in their car, riding the bus, and just trying to understand what their lives are really like and figuring out how can we get information that is relevant to the lives that they lead.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap up shortly, but Celia's just gonna tell us a little bit about the educational rating system that she's working on with Common Sense and some of the dimensions that we rated on.
Sure. Before I get to that, Vicky, I just wanted to touch on what various people are saying. The study looked at children's media use in the home. What we didn't look at is access or use of media in any other context, school being a very important one, as well as any other context that children frequent. So if there's data out there, I think there's some preliminary notes that tablets may be overtaking other forms of other platforms in schools, and teachers also don't necessarily know what to do with them or how to sort through the sort of plethora of content that's available. So just to put that out there as a follow-up to this research would be good to find out how much access children have outside the home. And very quickly on the Education Ratings Project, like David pointed out, the other initiatives that are already looking at these kinds of assessments of quality, we are trying to take as holistic an approach as possible and look at both cognitive elements as well as social and emotional and physical learning elements, and both implicit, as you pointed out, what are the implicit messages in media as well as what are explicit learning goals in media. I'll wrap up with that, but stay tuned at Common Sense, and you'll learn more as the months progress.
Okay, and then I'm going to turn it to Jim to make any final comments.
The only thing I would say finally is, number one, thank you to the panelists for coming. This is like, for me, I do this every day. All you incredibly smart people. I think and thank you to the audience, because we have so many of the most important folks in the field here today with us. So my real thought is, look, as we all know, when we talk about media technology today, there are enormous possibilities and enormous perils. The one thing that strikes me out of this, other than how smart you all are and how much we all should do together, is that the possibilities now are great in the new. This is where the research is, we're clearly, Dan said, it's going to the new media. We know that. Yeah, but it hasn't been formed yet, so we have a chance to do it right this time. And I think that the people in this room are some of the key players who can actually make that happen. So that's what I think I would leave us with, is this research. Thank you very much, Vicky and Rideout, for putting this together. We're going to do lots more research with you guys over the coming year. But we all really ought to think about taking some of the very practical stuff about parent engagement, reaching folks through the schools. You know, how do we leverage the talents and the resources that are just on this stage in this audience? Because with the people in the room today, we can do this in a really transparent way. I'm very grateful to everybody for participating and joining. And the best is yet to come. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in.